Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at the timeline tier list, which follows the Alliance Conquest tier list that I featured in my last video. There's only about a day or two left before the next update drops, so if Warlock ends up being strong enough, I'm sure that he'll end up on this tier list somewhere, hopefully closer to the top because of his cost. Anyways, this video is probably going to be pretty short and straightforward, though if you're interested in seeing some PvP action in terms of how certain characters are played on manual and how to counter or face against certain characters, as well as a very interesting mechanic or interaction with a particular skill, then make sure to look at that following this tier list explanation and breakdown. As you can see from this tier list, it's a little bit different from the Alliance Conquest one, mainly because you're going to be using only 3 characters in timeline, and the only difference or changes that will influence your team are mostly going to be either from bans or if you are going to counter a particular team. For that reason, you basically just have one main category, which is going to be your main characters that essentially will carry your team throughout the fight, as well as some secondary options, which are going to be either ban dependent, or if you are going to counter particular teams, you might have to switch it up. After that, you have 2 other categories, but these are mostly just to help out your main team and your secondary. So it's going to be things like leaderships to either give you a debuff removal or to give you some extra damage potentially, or support for the same reason, extra damage or extra defense or survival or whatever else have you. Because there are so many good PvP characters now, but you're only limited to 3 characters like I mentioned, then I kind of divided the list a little bit. I kind of included a cutoff, so characters that are below the cutoff are ones that you typically wouldn't pick because you have better options available to you. And then obviously the ones that are above are the ones that are recommended to use and the ones that are typically meta for timeline. So taking a closer look at the actual characters on the list, i.e. the meta characters, in the main category, which are going to be predominantly characters that can basically take out a whole team, the very best character in the game currently for timeline is Sentry, without a doubt. This might not be the case when using the character on auto, but the list is based off using the character on manual, and Sentry is at the very top because he's a universal type. He has that debuff removal as his leadership, which is essential for pretty much every team most of the time, and because his damage is high enough even without a damage proc, where you can layer multiple skills on top of one another to basically one-shot any opponent on the other team, sometimes even if they have multiple supports to assist them from dying, Sentry can still take them out. With the Far From Home update, Spider-Man got catapulted into the number 2 spot for many reasons. One of them is that he can ignore damage mitigation increases with his passive, dealing extra damage to villain types, and the fact that he constantly iframe ignores and is himself in iframes and constantly healing as well. Doom was previously in the 2nd spot, but with Spider-Man coming in and being such a hard counter to him, Doom kind of falls back into the 3rd spot, especially if Sentry is banned on certain weeks. Emma Frost is also very strong and arguably in the 4th spot now because of a lot of things that she has in her kit. She has Reflect, she has iframe ignore, she constantly iframes herself and also heals on particular skills like her 5th, I believe, and she has a lot of CC effects that can lock down the opponent as well as very high priority iframes, allowing you to hit a lot quicker than most other opponents. But that's not all. She also actually has a hidden kind of effect or interaction versus characters that either have that immortal passive or immortal artifact. You can see exactly what I mean later in the video where I actually test this out. Wolverine and Gilgamesh were previously higher on the tier list, but with Emma's introduction and her being such a hard counter versus them because of the type advantage and because of that hidden interaction or effect that I mentioned, they basically fall down under Emma Frost into the 5th and 6th position. Then after that you have Icarus, which I would say is kind of an underrated character. He is pretty strong, and acts essentially like a stand-in for Sentry when he's banned on those weeks. I'm actually kind of surprised that people don't use him more often, since on the week that Sentry was banned, I actually ended up getting a flawless streak and won every battle, whereas other people kind of struggled. In addition to that, with Cersei and Gilgamesh kind of making a run for timeline and frequently being featured in that, he gets a perfect opportunity to synergize with those characters and works really well in the leadership position. Some might argue that Silver Surfer is a better character than Icarus, but unfortunately Silver Surfer is often used in the leadership position, and on manual at the very least he is very easy to counter or play against, since you basically just run around till he uses his third skill, and then basically you can do whatever you want and kill him and he won't really do anything to counter you. You might actually be surprised to learn that Jean is still in the top 10, and the reason for that is because she can counter some of the really strong combat types that have made a run for the top of timeline. Because she has such high element resist, she can go up against Wolverine, and because she has that all mental resist down, she can fight characters like Gilgamesh who have that 100% mental resistance, or rather the mental immunity. And with Emma making an appearance in the tier list, Jean has that type resistance versus her, so she can survive the burst damage from her, drop her 5th and other skills, heal up, do high damage, and beat her that way. The only real issue with Jean currently is that she has no iframe ignore, with so many characters having that as a staple in their kit. Pretty much every character that you see on the list above her has that iframe ignore, so if she got an artifact that allowed her to do that, or possibly a new uniform soon, then she would climb up to the higher levels of the tier list. As I mentioned previously, the second tier is kind of secondary or alternate characters that you would pick when the main characters are banned. The second tier is secondary characters, so you can use them as backup in case your main character dies, or if the main characters are banned on certain weeks, then you have some options to pick from this tier. With that said though, the current meta for timeline seems to be shifting more towards having one strong main character and two supplemental characters to boost that character up, or having a strong leadership and a strong support to help the main character. So with that said, you're typically not really going to be picking from this part of the list too often, since you're probably going to benefit more by choosing a strong lead in the later two tiers, I guess, of the list, or picking two supports from that tier as well. In terms of leaderships though, Molecule Man is at the very top because his leadership allows you to counter most of the supports that are currently meta in PvP, which are usually characters like Hela or Colossus now. Ebony Maw used to be the go-to support, but now with more characters doing that rock, paper, scissors mechanic, being either combat or speed type or blast type, Ebony Maw doesn't really see that much usage, even though his support can't be countered by Molecule Man. This is partially why I put Cersei in the 4th spot as a support, since her passive against villains can be removed by Molecule Man, though arguably she can go in the 3rd spot because a lot of people are currently running Eternal teams in Timeline. And she's obviously a staple because she gives them debuff removal, as well as having 2 lives and that high burst damage with her awakening after she dies. There isn't really too much to say about the characters that are not meta, since most people won't use them in Timeline, but depending on where you are on your account, you do have some decent options for the characters that are not meta but are still pretty good in PvP. So Captain Marvel, for example, can be a really good counter versus villain types if you don't have some of the other characters that are currently in the meta. Sadly, Thanos is near the bottom of this list, and I'm really hoping that he does get that uniform that was somewhat teased with this new update. Hopefully he gets the new uniform and a really good artifact that gives him at least iframe ignore, so he can use his skills to heal and remove buffs from the opponent. Other than Thanos, I would say that maybe if Nova, the Richard Rider one, and Phyla-Vell got an upgrade, they could possibly re-enter the meta, since Nova does have his own iframe ignore, as well as that 85% chance to penetrate all sources, and he has that support passive, Phyla-Vell obviously also has her own support passive as well as Reflect, and her support can't be removed by Molecule Man's leadership. I teased during the tier list for Emma's placement that she does have a kind of hidden interaction or mechanic using her 5th skill, and that's to do with her charm and the immortality effect. If you notice, versus Wolverine, all she has to do is use her 5th skill, and because of the charm and burst damage, it allows you to somehow suppress or bypass that immortality kind of effect and allow her to basically kill the opponent regardless of whether they have the artifact or not. This effect or interaction isn't exclusive to Emma. If you've fought Circe, she also has a charm, I believe, on her 4th skill and can potentially do the exact same thing. If you didn't catch what I was talking about in those first 2 clips, I super slowed down this second test for you to see exactly what I was talking about. As soon as I use the 5th skill, Wolverine instantly dies and the artifact doesn't even activate, no procs actually activate at all, and the fight just ends. I realized that this was due to the charm effect because when I tested versus this team that you're seeing, when she fought Wolverine for the 3rd time of the test that I did, she didn't use her 5th skill right off the bat, and Wolverine did actually activate his artifact, whereas with the other instances where she used her 5th skill and that charm effect, she went through the artifact and killed him right away. Before I end the video, I just wanted to show off some quick tips when using Spider-Man, since he's one of the top metas now, so you can see how dominant he is, and you can also get an idea of certain things that you can do. So here, for example, you can use the 3rd skill there before going into your 4th and 5th to get a little bit of extra damage versus Doom on his 2nd life. When fighting certain Reflect characters like Colossus, for example, the best thing to do is to frequently spam your 4th skill to lock him down and to immediately go into your 1st skill so that you stay in iframe. Similarly, when fighting opponents that can potentially one-shot you, like Wolverine with his counter or his 5th skill, you basically want to constantly keep spamming that 4th skill because of that super guard break and the web that ignores immunity, essentially keeping the opponent locked down as you fill up your ult, or go into your 3rd and then 5th skill to potentially one-shot them. Another tip when facing off versus Emma, not necessarily with Spider-Man, but when you're fighting her, her 3rd skill, the iframe ignore, is usually the 1st skill that she uses when she enters the battle, and if the opponent has a proc on it, it can potentially one-shot you. But if you move away from her when she spawns and she uses that skill, it'll essentially get cancelled because she'll be out of range and she'll immediately go into another skill, which will give you enough time to activate your skills and potentially kill her. One final tip when you're fighting an opponent Spider-Man with your own Spider-Man, when the opponent enters the fight, they'll start off with the 4th skill and then immediately go into the 5th skill. After you see them stick you, you kind of move away a little bit to avoid the damage from the 5th skill, and then by kind of running a little bit further away, you can have the spider bots trail you, allowing you to go into your 4th skill at the right time. Will make it so you dodge the damage from that because you'll fly off towards the opponent, and then you'll have the advantage of having them CC'd so you can do your damage and win the fight. So just to reiterate, when the opponent enters the fight, spam your 4th skill as well, but after you finish the 4th skill and go through them, just run away from the opponent to avoid the 5th skill damage, and then use your 4th skill again when it's up, but by dodging the spider bots. If the timing for that sounds a little too difficult for you to pull off, the other thing that you can do is when the opponent uses their 4th skill and those little red dots appear on you, you can swap out to another character and it'll cancel all of the spider bots, CC, and webbing that you would have gotten. That does it for this video. If you have any questions regarding the tier list or for timeline in general, then just leave it in the comment section down below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. The next videos will likely be for the next patch, so make sure to tune in for that this week. As always, thank you for your time and watching, but the video is now over.